I also have a master's degree in project management. I've been doing project management for probably over 30 years. Big projects, multi-million-dollar projects, and little projects. Done a lot of projects for banks. I helped the banks back in the days when the ACH first came out. I was kind of like the West Coast expert and went up and down the coast teaching banks how to get that going. I kind of like to have this kind of interactive. So if you have questions or concerns or whatever, please let's talk about it. We're going to do this in 4 parts. The first 2 are just the basics, and you know, I can't really cover everything about project management in 4 hours. There's a lot more to it, but we'll cover enough so that, you know, get you started, and then we can talk about whether or not we want to do something else later on. So one of the problems with project management is scaling projects. Okay, where you know you have a big project, there's a lot of emphasis on project management. A little project, especially for small businesses, you know, how much rigor do you, project management rigor do you put into it to make it work? And I kind of look at flying a little bit. You know, we use a checklist and we go through and check the airplane before we fly. And we do that every time, whether we're going to fly for 15 minutes or 5 hours. Okay. On the other hand, if we're going to fly for 5 hours, we're going to go someplace, then we do a little bit more on study on the navigation and do a little bit more. So that's kind of, we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. Most project managers, that's one of their biggest struggles. How do you don't want to overburden a small project, at the same time you want it to be successful, you know. So, oh, I got a clicker. And so much for that idea. Okay, so definition of a project. It's got a life of its own. Okay, it's got a beginning and an end. Okay, and it's something generally unique or different. Okay, it's not normal day-to-day operations. You don't apply project management to that. But if you want to, you know, enhance a product and you want to study it, if you want to create a new product or just decide on a new marketing routine, project management works great for those kinds of things, where there's a beginning and an end. Some projects go on and on and on and on. You know, I thought this tunnel project in Seattle was going to be one that, you know, probably never end, and it's still not over yet, right? So, project management is made up of several different parts, and the objective, the requirements, planning, tracking and monitoring. Are we being successful? Communication reports, telling people how things are going. Management likes to know, what are you doing with my money you're spending, right? How's it going, right? Change control. And we'll spend some time on change control, because, you know, somebody says, hey, do this, and then later, oh, well, why don't you do this too, you know? Oh yeah, hey, I got this idea, you know? I did a project for Adobe, and it was kind of interesting. And a bunch of developers, and they're working on this project, and they've been working on it for a long time, and it just wasn't going to end. And so Adobe asked me to go in and manage it, and what I found out was the developers were really, really good, but they would say, oh gee, you know, if we did this, I can do that, you know. They were creating new scope as they were going, you know. And finally, you know, I came in and I put a stick in the ground and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to deliver that. After we get done with that, if we want to enhance it, we can. But you got to finish the project. Otherwise it goes on and on, you know. And as it turns out, we still delivered it late, but only by an hour. That wasn't bad. I could live with an hour. You know? It was a little technical difficulty of getting the computers to do something we needed to do. Then termination. You got to end the project, you know, and tell people it's done. And one of the things we'll talk about is follow-up. Did we accomplish what we were set out to do, right? So we're going to talk about these in more detail. So the objective, it's an idea, goal, big picture. What's the impact on that? Okay, you know, if we do this, how is that going to affect the company? You know, are we looking to increase profits? Are we looking to increase revenue? Are we looking to increase sales? Okay, that could be your goal. And then you turn around and say, well, how are we going to do that? We're going to improve our marketing, improve our website, we're going to hire more salespeople. How are we going to increase sales? This is where you start the objective. You have to define what you're going to do. And it has to be kind of clear. Because you can't just say, hey, you know, I got this big moon up here and we're going to go to the moon, right? Well, it's probably a good idea to figure out where on the moon you want to go, right? So that's kind of what we're looking for as the objective. And, you know, it has to be measurable. Because we talked a minute ago about the fact when you terminate, were we successful? Okay? So if we're going to increase sales, first thing we need to know is what our sales are, so that we know that we've actually done something, increased it. Otherwise, we've spent a lot of time spinning wheels and may never have gotten anywhere, right? So you guys have a project you're thinking of doing?
Yeah, I think what you just said about trying to just decide between what's day to day and then what's something that you can set aside is like, this is something to project manage, something I would take back and think about, for sure. I think there are some things that are maybe annual processes or quarterly processes that I could take through a project management structure and maybe improve my performance.
So this is the beginning, you know, you got to come up with what it is you want to do. And then we start structuring it. So, requirements. Boy, our third session, we're going to talk about tools. And these are some of the tools that are available for defining requirements. But again, you know, okay, we've decided we're going to increase sales. Let's say we're going to redevelop our website. Well, what do we want it to be different? We want it to be easier to use, more functional, easier for people to find products. Years ago, I was on an airplane, and I was reading one of those magazines, you know, you get on the airplane, and there was a product in there that I was really interested in. I thought, wow, this is fantastic. So, you know, I got home and I went on the website, to this company's website, you know, it was on the article. I couldn't find the product. And it just drove me nuts because the company was organized by divisions and you had to know what division that product was in. Rather than, you know, hey, here's our products, customer, you know, customer friendly, easy to find, easy to use, you know. So that could be, you know, a thing. So do we want to, you know, how do we want to do that? How do we want to navigate? Do we want a search engine? These are all different kinds of things you would define the requirements, you know. If you're going to build a building, okay, how many floors, you know, how many windows, how many offices, or how many rooms, you know, build a house, you know. You got to kind of say what you're going to do because, you know, it's easy to say, go do this. When my wife and I were first married, and we were living in Mercer Island, after work, we had a kind of window seat that looked over Lake Washington. And we'd sit there with a glass of wine. And my wife would come and she'd say, you know, the people at my office, you know, they just don't understand. Why don't they just do what I want them to do? You know? And so we talked about that. And, you know, I said, well, what is it you want them to do? Well, I want them to do this. I said, well, do they understand what that means? Do they understand what you want, you know? Today, she is absolutely dedicated to project management. She understands that, you got to tell people, explain to them, you can't just say, hey, build me a car, right? What do you get, right? Or better yet, build me an airplane. I'll define that for you. Okay, and then trade-offs. Sometimes in defining requirements, if you want to do this, you don't get this. If you want that, you can't have this, right? You got to look at those trade-offs and what the impacts are, okay? That's as important as defining the requirements, because sometimes you can't get there from here, and you have to know that, and you have to be willing to tell, people that you can't have that, okay? We don't have the technology, we don't have the whereabouts, whatever, or, we're planning a $10,000 project, and that particular thing might be $25,000, right? You just blew your budget. You must be government. So, and we'll talk about these things and how to do requirements, because that requires a lot of effort, and to get, and you can't just sit down and design it. You got to have input from different people so that you get the right answer, right? That was the other thing my wife and I talked about. She's, well, I know what I want. Well, what do other people want? How is it all going to work for everybody you're working with? Because if you make it for you, it may not work so well for other people, So those are the key things with requirements. And you got to be very, very specific. You got to be what it is, what color it is, what font it is, what you can't just let people go, because what will happen if you do? Then they're going to come back with a list of questions, or they'll finish the product and you're going to say, "Gee, I don't like the way it looks. I don't like teal. Should have been a dark blue, right?" So, in project management, we have what we call the triple constraints. And we talked a little bit earlier about scope with the project at Adobe. Okay, if you change scope, it's going to affect cost, it's going to affect the time, and it may affect the quality. Okay, this is we call the triple constraints. And it's something that, as a project, this is what you have to manage. Okay? Somebody comes in and says, "Hey, I want this in your project." Well, it's going to take longer, it's going to cost more, or take this out, save some money. So this is what project managers do. This is their job, is to manage this. Okay? They may not be expert on the project they're doing. Okay, they may not be a programmer, or they may not be a builder, but this is what they manage, and they manage the experts to get the job done. And this is where some of your trade-offs come in that we talked about, and it affects quality. And quality is another issue project managers will often have to deal with. What's good enough? What kind of quality do you want? Is it gold-plated, diamond-studded, or are you willing to take a Volkswagen? If you're looking for transportation and you're trying to decide what kind of vehicle, you're only going to go from here to the office once a day. You really need a big truck. On the other hand, if you're weekends you're having to haul a lot of stuff, it makes a difference. And that's kind of what this is all about. And so it's elastic. It's really not a triangle in the sense that, because it's constantly moving. And, you read in the paper about all these government projects, and the tunnel is a good example, where, we estimated, and darn it, we forgot that we needed to put in ventilation in the tunnel. Well, people need to breathe, it costs. Now, that's, in some project management studies now, that triple constraint has changed a little bit. And I haven't really dealt a lot with this, but they've added quality as one of the corners with expectations. Okay? And expectations is really what life's all about, isn't it? And this is where it becomes critical to understand the quality and what people are expecting. Your boss says go out and do this. What's he expecting? It's if you're doing something for a product, what are your customers expecting? What do they want out of it? Okay, do they want it to jump up and down and spin around? They just want it to sit on the ground and hum? What is the expectation? I go to a website, my expectation is I don't have to dig through it to find what I want. It should pop out to me, It should learn from things I enter. That's today's technology allows us to do that. Years ago, we had some technology, but we had a lot of resource issues. Computers didn't have enough memory. They didn't have enough and whatever. Today, we've covered most of that. Almost any computer, when I started, I worked with computers, and we had a room this big full of computers. I have more power in this little thing right now than we did. So the expectations of being able to get what you want, the way you want it, one of the things my wife and I talk a lot about is customer satisfaction. She's a doctor, so patient care, customer satisfaction, same thing. But it's important. If you want to keep your customers, you want to do the right thing. So if you're going to do a project, you want to make sure that expectation is what they're looking for. And so one of the tools that we saw, was called brainstorming, where you get some people together. And you might want to get some people in the company, or you may want to get some customers together. Okay? I used to do some work with Microsoft years ago, and they would come out with a new product or new features and stuff, and I go and sit down with them in a room and go through it. I remember one day that, in fact, it was the last time I was there. They were showing me this new product they were developing, and it actually stunk. It was absolutely bad. It was terrible. And I said, "You're Microsoft?" and it was. There were other products on the market that were head and shoulders better what they did, and that product never did get on the market. But they really didn't want to hear what I had to say, but they did because it was important. And so that's one of the things you might want to do. Part of it too is if you have a customer service or support department, and they're getting complaints about a particular product or whatever, they're good resources to determine what is the expectation. Okay, what do you need? So what I'm trying to do is get to the point of saying, okay, here's our project, so that now before we start actually building anything, we know what it's all about. That's what we're trying to do. And the more we know and define it, the less changes we're going to have to do, and the better results we're going to get, and we'll stay within budget and on time. I did a project for a large company. It was a $60 million project over 2 years. And, we defined it, and we delivered it on time, on budget. In fact, we saved $1,200. Whoopee. But you define it, and you get it to where you want to go, and you get the resources and plan it, and you can get there. Okay? So you can spend $60 million and get what you want. Okay.
So wait, so it was a $60 million project?
It's what?
It was a $60 million project that you were $1,200 off on when it was completed. Well, it's not bad.
Yeah, we're $1,200 under.
$1,200 under. Wow.
Yeah.
Better.
Yeah. That's a pretty good margin.
Well, and it was interesting because it actually was a program where I was the program manager and I had 6 project managers working on different pieces. So it was, you know, and it covered the operations across U.S. and Canada. And so, you know, it turned out really well.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. I got a lot of pats on the back from that one, but, you know. So, the next step in project management, planning. Wow. Okay. This is where the rubber hits the road. Okay. You now know what it is you're going to do. You have the specifications. You know what the expectations are. So now you have to break it down into how are you going to do it. Okay. And you do that by breaking it into tasks. Okay. And the task has to be definable, and it shouldn't be a long task, too many days, too many hours. It should be something you can control, because you want to know when that task is done. So if you have a particular resource that is going to work on that task, you can say, well, this resource can do all these things, have one big task, but then you can't track it, right? So you want to put together, okay, a work package. This is what needs to be done, how it needs it. So at Adobe, we had a particular piece of the program that had to be done. I had a developer and I said, okay, you code this, right? And then you tell me when you're done, and then you move on to the next piece. And this big project I had the same way. We had different phases of it, and the resources had different tasks to do. Okay, and until you define the task, you can't start estimating. Okay, you really need to know what work, and you probably are going to need to do a flow, right? So we'll talk about that. So let's talk a little bit just more about tasks itself. So it's a component of work, it's a function, and like I said, it needs to be something short and definable. One of the problems I had with the Adobe group is the project manager before me was saying, okay, you got that task, how are you doing? Well, I'm 50% done. I'm 80% done. Well, I can tell you by experience, you do that and you'll get to 90% done, and the last 10% will take as long as the first 90%. Okay? So, what I did, I put a stake in the ground again and said, it's either it started and it's done. If it's not done, it's not done. Okay? And the team really liked the previous project manager, and they weren't real happy with some of these things. But when we finished the project, they were like, wow, that really worked, It's like, example, I was on this big project. I was up in Canada at one of the sites, and they were having an issue with the supervisors not getting the time cards in on time. People want to get paid, they need time cards. And so we developed a mechanism. We put a big poster on the wall, and we put all the supervisors' names down the side and across the top with the dates. And every supervisor that got his cards in on time got a star for that one, right? Well, you can imagine what happened. Okay? Everybody wanted a star, right? And it didn't take long before everybody got their time cards in. The same thing with your task. Okay? If you say, oh, it's 50% done, okay, that's good. You really don't know. They don't know, right? But if it's either started and done, or not on the radar. Okay? Now, sometimes you can do things with your tasks that get a little bit, and again, we'll talk about project scaling a little bit, okay? Because your resources, you know, how you allocate resources will depend a lot on how this function comes out. We're going to talk about resources. But it's not unusual to say, okay, here's your task. And it maybe only takes 2 hours, but he's got 5 days to do it. Okay, human nature says, oh, I can do that in no time, right? And the last 2 hours of the last day, and guess what happens? It doesn't get done, does it? That's human nature, right? So part of the task functionality is you know, being able to define it in such a way and let the people resources know that, you know, if it's not done, you know, and they'll get it, because then they'll say, oh gee, I better start on and get it going so that I can get it done and not wait to the last minute, right? So, question on task. You understand what a work package is, what a task is? Okay. It may be like the framing of a room or a house, or putting the roof on, or painting it. Each of those are tasks, right? So estimating. Kentucky windage, right? How do you do that? You know, estimating is time, effort, and risk. One of the things that a lot of project management fails to do is apply risk. Okay? And you can do that in a lot of different ways, but how long is it going to take to do it? How do you estimate? Okay? A good way to do it is go to the resource that's going to do it and say, given this task, how long would it take you to do it? Okay? That's one way to do it. Another way is to take that and say, well, is that optimistic or pessimistic? Okay? If it's optimistic, you might want to add something to it. If it's pessimistic, you may want to subtract something from it. You can juggle. There are a whole bunch of formulas in project management that says, you know, you take 4 times the optimistic and 6 times the pessimistic, and you divide it by, you know, 6, and that, you know, that's close. Yeah. You know, that's just, you know, you're going through a mathematical thing, and you're saying, gee, this is really good, but you know, realistically, it's an estimate. It's a guesstimate, right? And so you want to work with the people that are responsible to get what's going to take to do that. Okay? Now, one of the things we'll talk about is in project management tracking, there's a couple different ways to do it. And most projects are done what we call critical path. And critical path uses Gantt charts, and it says the shortest distance to finish, start and finish. The problem with critical path is that it defines what they call a critical path, but it really isn't. Okay, because you can have another task, something that's not on there, that blows the whole thing out of the water. There's another project management methodology called critical chain, and I really like that. A guy named Goldratt developed it, and out at Yale University. And it incorporates risk in your project plan. And it actually shows you what you can do with it. And I find that I can do projects faster, cheaper, and better with critical chain than I can with critical path. So part of the estimating too is knowing the flow. What task has to follow what task? What can you start without a predecessor versus what you can't? Okay? Some things have to go, some things can happen all at the same time, some things can't. Okay? So and you might have multiple things. So this project I was doing, the $60 million project, you know, what we were doing is the company had grown by a lot of purchases, and over the years, you know, each of these groups were kind of almost autonomous. You know, they had their own HR department, they had their own payroll department, whatever, and so they finally said, you know, this is really stupid. You know, we're a company. This is what our company values are. We should all be on the same boat. So the project was consolidate all that. That was my goal, is to consolidate. And we had 37 payroll systems, and I forget how many HR systems and whatever, you know. But, so I had a team that did the HR, you know, I had a team that did the, you know, payroll process, and I had a team that did something else. You know, I had several teams that could work in parallel to get to the end. So it's not like it's got to start here and flow. You can have several flows separately, but they all come to at the end together, right? So estimating, you know, like I say, it's probably the hardest thing to do in project management is creating the estimate. You know, the boss says, "Gee, you said it was going to take $10,000, and you know you spent 12." So one of the things that project managers do to deal with the risk of being off is they come up with a contingency. Okay, and says, okay, $10,000 plus $2,000. Problem is, the boss hears 10, doesn't hear the 2. Okay, so you've got to say it's going to cost 12,000. So that's what they know, because they can't say, well, we need that contingency. You know, well, you're going to need it, probably. So you need to define the project in your estimate, including that contingency. And then if you don't use it, the boss is happy. Say, wow, you did it for 10 grand, you know, instead of 12. Wow, you know, look for something in your paycheck, right? So that's real important, is dealing with your risk in your estimating. You need to make sure that, okay, how good is my estimates? How confident am I in them? You know, and build a contingency. Again, in project management, there's some rule of thumbs that you can use. It says, you know, if the project is 10,000, you use a certain percentage. If it's bigger, you do whatever. Again, you can play the mathematics, but again, it's the bottom line is an estimate, and you know you have to be comfortable with it as a project manager.
So in terms of contingency percentages, it can change depending on the size of the project, how much of a percentage contingency you would use, or?
And the risk.
Yeah, it can. It's not necessarily the size of the project. It's more along the complexity of the project. Okay, you know, you can build a house for $150,000, or you can spend $500,000 to build a house, right? The effort of the $500,000 house, theoretically it's a bigger house, so it's going to take more effort. But the processes are the same, right? And so the contingency may be very similar. On the other hand, if it's something totally different, you've never done before, and it's got some complexity, you know, you may want to use 50%. You know, this is something you have to think about. You know, if it's something that's really never really ever been done before, and you know,
Time and materials.
yeah, well, and exactly, or unknowns. Okay, let's take the tunnel. Okay, they started digging the tunnel and they ran into something. They had no idea it was there. Remember? Big Bertha just came to a screeching halt. And look what happened to their budget. So, again, you know, I don't know, you know, I'm gonna dig, or I'm gonna do something, and, you know, I don't know what kind of delays, you know, you need parts, and all of a sudden we have a 60-day trucking strike, and you foresee that. You know, it's the complexity, okay? It's the material, the resources, the complexity of it that determines the size of the contingency. That makes sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
I don't feel I'm doing a good job on the estimating, so.
No, you're good.
I'm good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a difference between time and effort. Okay, the effort may be, it's gonna take 2 hours to do, but you may give them 5 days to do it. So the time is 5 days, but the effort level is only 2. And this depends upon your resources, okay? And we'll get into resources, so I don't get ahead of myself. So, once you have your estimate of time and effort, then it's a matter of determining budget, okay? What are your materials? And here again, if you need a lot of materials and you don't know what the cost factor is, this is again where you can deal with your contingency. Supplies, labor, resources. Do you use company resources? Do you hire special resources? Those things are you have to deal with in your budget. And again, risk and contingency. All dealing with cost. One of the things in cost is what your real cost is and what your project cost is. Okay. So if you sorry about that.
Did you build a film contingency into your presentation?
Yeah, I didn't plan that one. I should have, you know. I sat here for a while. I should have taken care of that, you know. Kind of threw me off, you know. So we're talking about effort and resources, and you know, if you're going to use company resources, okay, you have to deal with the fact that how much time can they spend on this versus doing their job? Or you can hire contractors to do things. There's, you know, some give and take there on your budget, and you know, again, that's part of your risk. You know, if you hire somebody and you can make them do the job versus, you know, taking somebody from the company and saying, hey, I need 2 hours a week of your time, and they're gonna go, you know, right? You know, and then how do you plan for that? So if you want to take a project and you want to capitalize it, okay, so that you can write it off, you want to include the cost of your resources, even if they're internal to your operation. If you're just going to expense the project, you may not want to even include the cost of those people in your project, because all you really have, materials and supply, you're going to pay them anyway, right? So it's one of those considerations to determine, you know, how you want to budget and you know, what your real impact is. Obviously, if you're going to capitalize something, you know, you're going to do a new product, and your project plan is to develop and, you know, bring a new product to market. You're probably going to want to capitalize that. In which case, if you're using internal resources, you want to count that time, right? And you got to count, you know, the holistic time. So, you know, they get a salary, they get benefits, they get vacation, you know, all those things, you know, add up so you get a total capitalization, right?
Explain the, I'm not sure I totally understand the nuance between capitalizing something and expensing something. So like in my world, expensing would just be like regular year-to-year expense budget, we absorb it in our, it's expensed, we absorb it in our regular annual budget, and then capitalize is like the bigger extra projects. Is that kind of along the lines of what you're saying, or what do you mean by that?
You can amortize a capitalization. So again, it's how you're structured and how your finance people want to do it.
Right.
Okay, so you know, depending upon your financial position at the time, it may be more advantageous to capitalize it and amortize it versus just expense it. Okay.
Or the life of the product or whatever.
And if it's small enough, you know,
Just
you're going to expense it. But it really is a financial situation that you need to talk to your finance people and say, what do you want to do?
Right.
Because you need that up front, okay? Because you need to be able to know how to budget. So if you go to the management and say, okay, here's my $10,000 budget, you know, or my $12,000 was contingency, but we're going to expense it, so that doesn't include, you know, people's salary, and you know, unless he says, well, I'd like to track that too, just for fun, but it doesn't mean anything, right? Because it's not exactly sunk cost, but it really is. You know, if you're doing something, you're going to pay them anyway. Okay, whether they sit there and twiddle their thumb or work on your project or work on something the company needs done, you know. So resources. We talked about staff a little bit. You know, using your people, internal people, hiring contractors. So we talked about materials and supply, but other resources are equipment, tools. You need to rent a tool. You need to buy some equipment to do something, you know. So in my Adobe case, for example, what we did is not real smart. We bought a software package to do what they wanted to do, and they were modifying it to fit what Adobe needed, right? And Adobe has a worldwide market, and the software package wasn't really designed that well for a worldwide market. So we had a cost of buying that piece of software before we ever started the project, right? Okay. And in some cases, you know, it's not a one-time fee. Sometimes it's, you know, an annual process, you know. So tools, you need, like I said, you need to rent tools. You need some special tools, you know. Do you need a special compiler to compile something, you know? We were doing it all in C code, and you know, but if we'd done something else, we might have had to buy a compiler. Services, do you need something in your project? Okay. If you're building a building, you may need somebody to come and collect the trash that you accumulate while you're building a building, or any other project you're doing. There may be some services required to help complete the project. So one of the things that I spent some time on is multitasking. What do you know about multitasking? Good, bad, what?
It's how mistakes are made.
Huh?
It's how I make mistakes.
Yeah. I did an interview one time, this gal, and she was smiling, and the first thing she said, you know, I'm really, really good at multitasking. And I looked at her and I said, oh, you're good at wasting time. And she was like, No, multitasking on a project is deadly. Okay, absolutely deadly, and it will cost you time and money. Okay, it's a normal thing people think of doing. Okay, so what happens with multitasking is you start a task, and you get sidetracked over here. What happens when you go back to that task? You have to figure out where you are and whatever. And you do that, and pretty soon that task that you estimated for 2 hours is now 4 hours long because you're not doing it.
But sometimes you don't have a choice, because say you have a contractor on this thing, you're waiting for that to be finished, so I'm gonna get this one dialed in while I'm waiting on that, then I have to follow up with follow-up. So sometimes you have, it's.
Some jobs require multitasking, true. And if your resources is required to do multitasking, you're gonna have to go back to your budget.
Right.
You know, this is what I'm getting at, is you can, if they're gonna do that, you can go back. So on this project I was doing, was a $60 million project, one of the things I did is I restricted everybody to 3 times a day answering their phone messages and their email. Because people, you know, get email and well, that's multitasking. You don't get anything done.
Right.
You know? So I made them work for 2 hours, check their email. They had to work for 2 hours, take their lunch break, check their emails, whatever. You know, that kind of scenario. So that 2 hours, I was getting 2 hours worth of work out of it, and not
Speaking of
30
that,
minutes.
I heard recently not to check your email first thing, because that does get you off of what your original task is for the
Yes.
day.
Yes.
Which
Yeah.
is so, that to me, I'm like, I'm trying to implement that, but it is working, but it's such natural habit to, let me just start my day and get this finished. But yeah, there goes the day.
Yeah, you have your thought process on how you're going to start the day, and the first thing you do is check emails, and you're right, it shoots it. Or you check your voicemails, the same thing. You know, your whole day is shot. And if you know, my wife's really bad about that. You know, she gets the phone buzzes. You know, she's got to grab the phone. You know, it's like, put it down, leave it alone. You know. You gotta have time to do things, otherwise you're just wasting it. And this, like I say, is the biggest impact on your project. If you've got people doing multitasking, you're gonna have a lot more cost and a lot more time. Unless the person has to do it, and if they do, then you have to budget that in there. That's part of all this process, is being able to budget in the fact that these people are going to have to do multitasking. Okay? So your estimated 2 hours just went out the window. Okay? And that's a hard one to estimate. Because, you know, but I can tell you, just rule of thumb, it's going to take you twice as long. Okay? I have a little game, a little bead game that I like to play when I teach project management, and you do multitasking, and then you do your task, and it's amazing how quickly you can do it if you don't multitask. It's really interesting. I learned that at the Goldratt Institute, you know, and the guy said, okay, we're going to do this task with these beads, and we all estimated, well, it'll take us 6 minutes. Well, we had several teams doing it, and the quickest team did it in 8.5 minutes. And then we took the multitasking out of it. We did it in 4 to 5 minutes. It was like, really? You know? So this is something you really got to look at, and you got to, you know, this $60 million project, you know, I had to have resources that worked on what they needed to work on. And, you know, when I first brought up, we're not doing multitasking, you know, it was like, you know, they weren't real happy. But after we did this for a while, people started putting up these signs, red circles with a line across with multitasking in it. People started putting them up in their cubes, you know, like wow, because they were able to get stuff done,
Right.
and they never thought about it before, and it makes a big difference. So in your estimating, you've got to consider your resources and how you're going to work them. Okay, and that goes back to your cost juggling, right? Okay, time for one more slide. So now we've got the budget, we've got the task, we've got all this stuff put together. Now we have to build a schedule. Okay? And are you familiar with a Gantt chart? Okay,
That's what that is.
that's what that is.
I've seen one.
Yeah, I've seen
Yeah.
contractors. The contractor.
This is a Gantt chart. Okay? And here's where, you know, if you're doing a small project, you can use Microsoft Excel and create a Gantt chart. There's a plug-in for that. If you're going to do a bigger project, more complex project, you're going to want a tool, a Gantt chart tool, and there are a bunch of companies that make them, including Microsoft. Microsoft's got a project called Microsoft Project. And there are some plugins to Microsoft Project that will convert it from critical path to critical chain, and all kinds of stuff like that.